What I'd like to do is just real quick before we dive in here, because we do have a compressed schedule, names, agencies or firms, and then just kind of just a super quick background on you, if you would, please.
Tim Lim, partner at NewCo, longtime panelist, longtime digital versus TV panelist, so I'm very excited about this. My background's in digital strategy for the Democratic side. Before this, I was a partner at Bully Pulpit Interactive for 6 years and ran digital programs for IEs, campaigns, and nonprofits.
I'm Amanda Elliott. I'm digital director at the Republican Governors Association. I've been there since 2017. Background in Republican digital strategy, mostly on the creative and content side. Before RGA, I was at the NRA and a couple other digital firms. So that's me. First time panelist here.
Jaime Bowers, I'm a senior VP at National Media, and I handle mostly digital media and been placing for 14 years, pretty long, and clients are Rick Scott, Corey Gardner, John James, and a lot of committees.
Well, Tim, we got you outnumbered, so we're going to pick on you first. Can you just give us kind of a quick rundown on your side of the aisle? Like, what's changed in terms of how you've approached screen mix planning, media planning, just in generalities this cycle so far?
It's a mixed bag. I wish I could say that the trend lines are 100% going in the way of comprehensive media planning. I can say I think there's a couple points I can make pretty definitively. One is there's no campaign on the Democratic side that thinks that you don't have to spend money on digital, right? Digital advertising is a core part of every campaign, a serious campaign that's going to be running this cycle. Where you see a lot of disagreements are going to be around the difference between acquisition versus persuasion. And because of a lot of the rules changes in the platforms, that debate has really pushed the favor in terms of non-digital platforms. And I think that my worry for this trend is that the inadvertent changes, the results of these changes are going to make the case to spend more on TV or radio or non-digital platforms.
Okay, and we're going to dive into some examples here in a little bit, but ladies on the Republican side, what's changed in your approach so far?
I've seen a pretty significant change in the last couple of years, especially since being at the RGA, in terms of just everyone from the top down embracing this need to diversify beyond just TV. And I've seen it even with the TV guys, kind of understanding that if we're going to reach the people we want to reach, we have to diversify and cut across screens. So it's been interesting to see that embrace. It's not just, everyone knows that we need to spend on digital, but it's still kind of in the past been TV is number one, which is probably not going to change anytime soon, but whatever is left over, like, we'll give you digital guys to like kind of figure out how to, split it up. But from the very beginning now, like in the media planning process, there's a larger embrace of the idea that we need to figure out where to reach our people and how to spend it, and it's from the GCs all the way down. They kind of get that concept now, which is really cool.
I'd say content consumption is up, and planning across screens like broadcast, cable, radio, and digital, and OTT. We've been always trying to figure out where our people are and how to reach them the best. So I'd say not much has changed from our perspective, just trying to figure out where to reach them and what's ad supported and what's not, and what's the best platform for persuasion ads.
All right, I'm going to ask one of my many unfair questions here, but in terms of the conversation surrounding data, right, and however you want to define that, how is the conversation going with clients or with candidate campaigns, right? Whoever kind of your end user will be. How do you broach the subject? How has the conversation changed from maybe where it was at this point in the 2018 cycle or certainly the 2016 cycle? Jaime, you want to lead off?
Sure, we still use a lot of behavioral targeting, and we use Scarborough and Nielsen research to inform some of our media planning decisions. I'd say less reliance on voter file match has been a positive change, because the match rates have been so low historically. So a lot of clients, that were once kind of wedded to that have changed their opinions.
Yeah, I would just echo what Jaime just said. When we talk to campaigns, we talk to them a lot about, having your first-party data is important, doing acquisition is important, having your own list usually important. But just to target those people is leaving a lot of voters on the table that you don't want to not reach or not target. So behavioral targeting is hugely important.
Yeah, I think one of the another inadvertent effect from the platform changes is that it is forcing a lot of the campaigns and agencies to rely less on voter file targeting, rely less on data targeting. The real, I think, question moving forward is, are we just going back to the times when we were targeting off of behavioral demographic? Are we going to take the next step in lookalike modeling? And actually, when we talk about lookalike modeling and lookalike targeting, doing it in a way that's impactful and that's not just adding a bunch of people to your data streams, but actually targeting a likely audience of voters. So I'm really interested to see this cycle how the campaigns and the agencies will respond to the lack of voter file targeting, because I think on the Democratic side we've definitely been more dependent on that than on the Republican side.
That's interesting. So it sounds like from the data side of the equation, we're all singing from the same song sheet. Are the candidates or the general strategists, is everybody caught up as far as where the agencies are? Or is there somebody that's lagging behind at some point in that conversation? Please do not name names, unless you want to.
I'd say most people are caught up by this point. There's a lot of people that come to us and say, we want to be on Game of Thrones or something like that. Like, well, that's, not ad supported. So
Right.
we're always trying to say, like, okay, well, or Stranger Things or one of those other Succession. So we're always trying to figure out, like, how to reach people who are watching those shows, how to reach people who are cord cutters. And I think that goes into more of the platform stuff that Tim talked about with, the cord cutting affinity audience with Google, and not being able to use that anymore. But how to target people who are, consuming media across other screens and don't have a cable subscription and, are using non-ad supported platforms.
Can you guys kind of dive into a particular race or a particular campaign for us? Just give us an example of, the planning process that you have seen happen at least successfully and something that's been recent, maybe even this cycle or the 2019 cycle. And I know we're still pretty early here, so if you want to go back to 2018, fair game.
I can be vague. The 2018 cycle, I think what we saw in the 2018 cycle with a lot of, certainly some of my clients as well as in the larger Democratic sphere, was a recognition that you can't have monolithic planning, right? And I think on the Democratic side, I think it's a little bit tougher for us because of who our target audiences are, right? When you look at the diversity, when you look at the variety, the diversity of our audiences and the media consumption habits of our audiences, it's just harder, and it is harder to get to our target audiences, to reach them, and to be able to put content there that's going to be impactful, right? You can't just put one ad and expect that to work for each of our target audiences. There's some who, from a cultural, from an age perspective, that we have to be cognizant of and we have to tailor it towards. So in 2018, there was this recognition. We have to be much more tailored with the content, and then that results in better targeting, because what works for one target audience is not going to work for the other.
But is that an easy, before we move on, is that an easy conversation to have between the content creators and the folks developing the creative and the demand for content versus the planners and the ability to actually target down one-to-one?
No. It is a very stressful discussion still to this day. I do think that we do have to somehow bridge this gap between the creative development, the media planning, and the analytics sides. They should not, these processes should be happening in tandem. They should not be happening one before the other. And what is still happening today is too much siloing, and the siloing effect results in either bland creative or monolithic creative, creative that's not working, but with the time constraints, you're just putting it up anyways.
But is the problem really the time constraints, or is it budgeting?
I think there's a lot of money. I mean, we're spending a lot of money. I don't think money's the problem. I mean, I think everyone here, I mean, we just looked at these numbers, these fantastical numbers, right? I mean, these are insane numbers, and these numbers only get crazier this cycle. It's poor planning, right? So if I think we're still talking about creative testing today, real impactful creative testing, and not being able to successfully implement it across the industry because so much is unknown or no one knows the turnaround times. But you need to do this. You need to make sure, one, that the creative testing is impactful, so it's relevant to the target audience, that's happening at a timetable that makes sense, and that you can actually use it then. You can actually use it to change your creative. We're still, there's not a universal consensus here on how to do that and what's the best way to do it. And so a lot of the ways that we're judging a campaign on how successful it is based on very old metrics.
I think on the candidate side, it's a little bit easier to get custom creative audience targeting for women or men or sports or whatever it is than it is on the IE side. Just because you're creating so many ads so quickly, but it's a little bit easier to work with a candidate to target certain messages to certain individuals.
Okay. Well, before we leave this kind of part of the conversation, I think it'd be really helpful for some of the folks in the room and some of the folks watching online. Can you give us some specific examples of the process that you've gone through involving the client, involving the rest of your organization, whether it's the RGA or national media, just walk us through a little bit about the planning process and the specifics on a race or two, if you would.
Let's see, that's a loaded question. It's always different per state. So last year, we were active in 3 governor's races, and the planning for our media buys started pretty early, but it still fluctuated over the year in terms of just like how our dollars were going to be allocated. And one thing that I will say is that kind of reinforces everything we're talking about on this panel is when kind of the dust settled at the end of the year, when we looked at some analysis of our TV buys in one state in particular, it was really interesting to see that like 60%-ish, something like that, of our TV ads were only served to like 20% of our audience. So there was a small group of people that were highly oversaturated and saw our ads on TV many, many, many times. And then everyone else was just kind of like left in the dust. And that's kind of reinforces our planning going forward of we need to figure out like at the front end how we're going to reach people and not just basically like flush money down the toilet. And so that kind of like now we're having conversations for 2020 of how we are going to reach those people, those cord cutters or those light TV viewers across different screens and where they're at. So that was really interesting to see and probably not surprising to anyone in this room.
I'd say some of our creative consultants are a little too eager to create new messages for new people. Just because you don't hit saturation if you are putting an ad up with, kind of a limited budget for a short period of time and then are rotating several different ads in. But that being said, our consultants have worked and created a lot of good stuff with the candidates, and we had a lot of good stories to tell after 2018, which a lot of people want to participate with publishers and have a good story to tell and have case studies to show reaching the certain audience worked.
That's pretty awesome. So I'm tempted to ask you the who owns OTT question, but I'm sick of hearing it. So I'm not going to ask you that, but I'm going to cheat and I'm going to get you to talk about it. Here's what I want to know, because that's kind of the debate that I know a lot of folks are having right now. And as somebody that has a foot in both worlds, I can see the argument on both sides. How do you approach the answer to that when it comes to your races or your issue groups or your clients? How do you wish they would make those decisions in terms of where does OTT belong on the agency side of life?
I'd say OTT, we all want to do it. So the TV buyers and the digital buyers all want to do it. But coming from an agency that does broadcast and radio and all the other mediums, we think it's easier and more effective to do the whole buy with a full service agency, just because OTT, I know we talk about like just the TV screens, but there's just so much more, like Amanda said, light TV viewers, cord cutters, things could get lost in the mix if you don't have a good communication between your digital and TV firm and whoever is placing OTT.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, I would say it just depends, on who's doing the buy. Traditionally at the RGA, it's been kind of viewed more of a digital product than anything else. And it's not really necessarily coming from the TV budgets, it's just kind of coming from digital, and the whole advertising spending pie has gotten a lot bigger. So I view it as kind of a digital thing, although I know it kind of blurs the lines between TV and digital, and I would just say it just kind of depends. And especially if you're working with an agency or if you're doing buying in-house, it could go both ways.
So, Tim, apparently there's not a lot of hard and fast rules on our side of the aisle. What about your side?
Yeah, it's a fight. It's a real fight. I think the difference between the Republican and Democratic sides, and I usually laud the Republican side when it comes to the media buying, because I do see that there's more comprehensive media buyers on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, it's so fractured, right? There's TV buyers and digital buyers. A lot of times the TV buyers will say, no, we can do TV and digital, trust me, and they're just outsourcing to a digital firm. Digital firms who are saying, no, I can do TV buying too. They're just bringing a TV buyer in, right? It is astounding to me that the lack of real comprehensive media planning there is in campaigns today, because Robert, as you said, having a foot on both the brand side and the political side. If you're talking to brand side agencies, you're talking to Havas, you're talking to WPP, you're talking to these large firms, they look at this and they're just horrified, right? They look at what we do and they look at the way that we plan. They're like, that is horrifying, and I agree with them, because media is media, right? If you get it on your phone, if you get it on your iPad, or if you get it on a TV screen, it's media, and that's where we need to be thinking about, because in the next 10 years. The largest base of consumers and voters, that's how they're looking at it. And so, the more backwards we are and the more we try to keep on to this, siloing effect, you're just going to have, less impactful media programs.
You bring up an interesting point from the non-political agency world. Is there other learning that we could be bringing into, especially in the 2020 cycle, into the political media space? Is there anything that you guys wish was happening that isn't?
Do I have 3 hours? So much. There's so much I can start with. I think metrics-wise, there's this. It's so archaic still, the way that we look at the impact of a program. People are still using clicks. They're using CTR. They're using CPCs for persuasion programs, and that doesn't make any sense, right? It's like. That engagement does not equal sentiment, and yet we're still judging the success of something by how many clicks you get off of it. And so, we have to be putting a much bigger emphasis on reach, on frequency. We have to put a much bigger emphasis on sentiment shift. We should be putting sentiment tracking or sentiment surveys on everything that we're running, really, to judge if the campaign is working, because that's how the brand side does it. Right? If you're spending money and it's not getting you the ROI in terms of that movement, then they're going to do something else. And so, for me, that's the biggest thing I think I'd like to see from the brand side coming into the political side. I'm not going to hold my breath.
I would say longer advertising windows. A lot of us only have 3 to 6 months to get this program off the ground, and there's only one day that really matters. So having everything kind of weighted towards that. Don't really have a lot of time to get any, sentiment surveys out or brand lift studies. But if we did, I think it would be a good thing, starting to advertise a little bit earlier, doing some message testing. That would be helpful.
More time, yeah. Good luck with that. All right. I want to delve into your thoughts, because you guys have kind of danced around this a little bit, but I'm really curious from your perspective, where do you wish the conversation was that it's just not? What do you wish clients were really asking for? and you have to push them on or perhaps educate them on. Where is the conversation need to get to in the next few months for either side to be successful or to articulate a message and be convincing and compelling and educate and entertain and do all the wonderful things that we say that we're going to do before we just throw up 1,000 points on TV and cross our fingers and hope for the best?
I would say more research. A lot of clients don't ask for the research, and we do have it, or we can get it. So more research based on like what
kind of
people are
research?
watching, like Nielsen research or Scarborough research, or how we're making our media buying decisions, and then what the reach and frequency of this budget actually is. So I wish they were asking for that. And a lot of people say like, OTT, I need to be there, but they don't understand it's actually just reaching cord cutters and what that entails, and that it's a huge gray area.
Do you view OTT simply as a cord-cutting play, or do you think it's a incremental reach play, or is it campaign by campaign?
I think it's campaign by campaign, but a lot of times we look at it as incremental reach. But you have to reach all these people who aren't consuming your content or who have ad blockers, and how to do that. It's just a hard thing to do, and it's not just on the TV screen. It could be on your tablet, and then it could be on the TV screen, or the phone while you're commuting.
We were joking in the back of the room, by the way, that everything's just going to come full circle, and we're going to be doing nail files, and nail files are going to win races. So
Billboards, digital billboards. I think for cord cutting also, for the most fascinating aspect for me is gaming, right? When you look at the cord cutters, it's not necessarily people who don't want to just pay for cable. It's folks who are relying on their PlayStations, or they're relying on their Xbox, they're relying on their Wii. And so gaming, I think, is becoming more and more and more of a prevalent part of our everyday life, whether it's on your mobile, whether it's on your TV. That's also how you're accessing a lot of content. And I would like to see campaigns spend a lot more time thinking, how do we utilize that time, right? How do we and we can track that time. Right, Apple's tracking that time on your iPhone. They can track how much time you're spending on gaming. Gaming's constituting almost 15 to 20% of mobile usage right now, and that number is only going to go up as you go down the age demographic. So, how do we take advantage of it? What are we doing to look into that spectrum, because that's where the brands are spending a lot of their time and energy on.
Have you had any clients yet ask you to kind of go down that, I hate to call it a rabbit hole, but it sounds like that could lead anywhere?
Yeah, some of the folks who are really looking at digital persuasion are spending a lot of time looking into this. I'm not talking about like Fortnite, which obviously is the largest gaming platform right now, but how do we take advantage of the time that people are spending on PlayStation? Because you're accessing your content and your games through a platform like that. So yes, it is an active discussion amongst the most forward-looking digital folks, but it's not a large part of the conversation in media planning, and it should be, I think.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say we're kind of in an interesting position at the RGA because we are kind of on the client side. We rely on agencies all the time to help us execute our buys, but also in certain instances we are able to talk and help out our governor's campaigns. And one thing that I wish they focused on more was just creative, like from the start. I think creative is often too overlooked and not seen as important as talking about platforms and budgets and where are we going to spend money. But the creative piece is so hugely important, whether it's persuasive or GOTV, and I just feel like a lot of times it gets put on the back burner because it is such a time-consuming task. But when we're talking about reaching voters and getting our message across, it's hugely important, and I wish campaigns talked about it with us more and their agencies.
Do you see that happening to a particular piece of the creative world, or is it everything? In other words,
Say everything, like across the board.
Because it used to be, right, everybody wanted to pay attention to the 30-second TV, and then it was like, holy cow, we've got to do a bunch of 6s, a bunch of 15s, and oh, here's some display. And
it sounds daunting.
Everybody
for a
forgot about
campaign.
search, and like you're playing all catch up in you spend 3 weeks preparing a 30-second TV spot and 2 hours preparing the rest. Yeah. But we're past that. But now we've forgotten, because we have all this amazing targeting out there, we've actually forgotten that, oh yeah, we actually have to convince people of a message.
We need a narrative,
Yeah.
a theme.
A brand.
Like maybe everything we're running on the 6-second and the static should have a theme and a narrative. I agree. Like, I think we've lost the storytelling part on the creative. Now it's about issues and audiences, and I think we have to take a step back and be like, okay, well, how does that relate to the theme of the campaign that we're running?
Really fascinating. Okay, folks, I'm going to put a little bit of the work on you here in a minute, but I do have one more question for this panel, and then I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience, if that's okay. All right, crystal ball time. There's always something, it seems, every political cycle that when we get to November and everybody catches up on their rest after Election Day, that there was one big thing in the media space that kind of surprises us. And it usually surprises everybody, right? What's it going to be? What's the one thing we're not talking about right now on a day like today, or it's not happening in the conversations with campaigns, it's not happening in the campaign office, it's not on the conference calls right now, but what's going to be the one thing from a media perspective that's going to surprise us?
I can go first. I think one thing that we'll be talking about in November 2020 is peer-to-peer texting and how much budgets went towards that. I know that campaigns and orgs have done peer-to-peer for a couple of years now, and it was pretty big in 2018, but I think it's going to explode this year. And we'll be talking a lot about how much money was spent on peer-to-peer texting, not just for get out the vote, but also for persuasion, and maybe even like to what extent those conversations impact the rest of your advertising strategy and creative in general. So I think that'll be really interesting to see. I'm excited to do some peer-to-peer this year, and I think it's just going to be huge.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. The peer-to-peer has taken a larger percentage of the budget from 2019 and then 2020. I anticipate that to continue. As far as the OTT, TV, digital, I don't think a whole lot will change there. It's just part of the program that we're doing it. We're always doing it, and continue, and we'll try to reach people where they are on ad-supported platforms, and that the nationals will go back to back.
I think I think on the media buying side, I don't think there's going to be any sort of massive stories. I do think on the Democratic side, we're underestimating the effect that these platform changes are having on allocation and media planning. I do think that we're going to see a lot of TV consultants make the argument that because of these changes, digital's not effective, so we got to spend all our money on TV. So my prediction for 2020 is that on the Democratic side, we'll spend more money on TV as a percentage than we did in 2018 or 2016, which is a horror. I can't believe I'm saying that. I think from just an overall perspective, I think the most interesting thing from my end is the data collection, data cataloging. In particular, a lot of the most forward-looking organizations and campaigns are looking at utilizing things like customer database platforms. So really being able to, attribute and append offline, online movements and behaviors to individual voter file entries, and that to me is really fascinating to really build not just an offline voter file identity, but be able to create a full-scale behavioral online/offline identity for those voters, and then being able to then utilize that. So to me, that's where things are moving. That's where the brand side already is, and would love to see more case studies like that after 2020.
Well, the good news is, thank you for all of that. I tend to agree with each of those options, so it's great to be a moderator and actually have to take a position. But the good news is, it's like giving the weather. You can be wrong. All three of you can be wrong, and everybody's going to forget this time next year. So it's great. And plus, it's like the Drew Carey show. The points are worth nothing. Okay, let's do a couple quick questions.
We have time for questions. If you guys have a question, raise your hand. Please tell us who you are and who you're with.
Barbara Beckett with the Weather Channel, so no thanks to that last comment.
I'll be over there.
So, yeah, so I was just wondering for candidate advertising, how important the environments that you're running in, either digitally, because you talk a lot about targeting specific audiences, but do you care what the environment that your message is surrounded by, digitally or TV?
I think that matters the most. For candidates, you want to be in the highest quality, most premium spots. If you're in the Super Bowl, like Trump will be, that's a good place for you to be. That generates some content, and it's mostly positive. If you're caught on a bad site, there's nothing you can do, and it hurts the candidate's brand rather than, if it doesn't hurt a committee's as much as it does a candidate.
And this is, I think, one of the biggest arguments against YouTube and programmatic is that there's very little brand safety this moving forward. And so, yeah, as an advertiser, you don't want your ad to be playing before a really horrible video or really awful content. And so it is something that you have to be spending a lot of time making sure that, on the ad operations side, that's something you're putting into consideration, and that you have your list of sites that you don't want to be on, and that you don't want to be on certain pieces of content.
Yeah, brand safety is key. The interesting thing, too, though, is I kind of feel like with the folks up on the stage and a lot of other kind of legitimate operators on both sides of the aisle, it's assumed that it's taken care of. It's not, in other words, it's not a problem until it's a problem, right? And I think a lot of people have paid attention to that already.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Carlos Cruz. I'm here from LoopMe. I heard some frustrations around how you're measuring the outcomes of these campaigns. Some are archaic metrics, clicks, completes, things like that. How are the current panelists exploring measuring the outcomes, the persuasion outcomes of those efforts at the moment?
Yeah, as the person who talked most about this, I'll take a stab. I think there's the ways that I think that the persuasion programs need to be measured for, and this is looking at the brand side and how they're measuring their sentiment changing programs, their brand awareness programs. We need to less of the focus on engagement and much more focus on reach and frequency. Actual reach and frequency, not the reach and frequency we're using now based on mobile based on devices. So how many people did we reach and how many times did they see the ad? And then outside of that, really being able to incorporate brand lift, survey impact tools, right? 1 week in the field, treatment control tests to be able to see whether or not the ads, the creative that you're putting out there is moving in the right direction. Because you can have the best placement in the world, but if the creative is catering and it's moving numbers in the wrong direction, then you don't want good placement. And I think that there needs to be much more of an emphasis on making sure you're doing those gut checks in the beginning part of the creative process, rather than waiting until the last minute. There, you have no chance to be able to change the creative.
Yeah, I'd say YouTube has a good brand lift study tool that you can get kind of, week by week results. And we use reach and frequency. How many times people see the ad? Is that effective? And how does that compare to what we're doing on TV? Is it 1,000 GRPs? And what level is that for digital?
With that, we have to wrap. Rob, Jaime, Amanda, and Tim, thanks so much for